Dear colleagues, the time of our session here, it's old centers and new trends, diasporas and the unmaking is now opened. We have to listen 4 papers. Goar Iskanderyan from National Academy of Science of Armenia, Yerevan, Shrinking Iranian Armenian Community and its Reason. And so Khachatryan from Ben Gurion University of the Negev, the Armenian of Israel, New Actors and the Old Diaspora, in the Old Diaspora. Carlos Antaramian from El Colegio de Michoacán de Mexico, Armenian Diasporas in Motion, Place, Stakeholders and Practices in the 20th century. And so Annika Törne and Zadig Tisserand from Basel University and French Institut des Études Politiques de Paris. Brothers in Arm, Brothers in Spirit, Diasporization of Karabakh in Armenia and Hamshen in Abkhazia. I may remind to our panelists they can speak no more than 20 minutes in order to give place to the follow session and the discussion. Now I give the first spelling time to Mr. Goar Iskanderyan, or Mrs. Goar Iskanderyan.
Բարև ձեզ, ես Հայաստանից եմ եկել և ձեզ ջերմ ողջույններ եմ բերել բոլորիդ հայրենիքից. But now I have to speak in English because it is an international conference. The Armenian community in Iran has diminishing influenced by objective factors, like Iran's challenging economic condition, various regulation within the Islamic Republic of Iran, and subjective issues such as the internal community conflicts. We will structure our speech into 3 segments. Limitedly, we will present the Armenian community in Iran and the outline of its structure. Subsequently, we will address the immigration rate and challenges faced in other countries. In the final part, we aim to identify internal community issues and explore the prospects of repatriation. Armenians in Iran and the structure of Armenian community. While the Armenian diaspora worldwide was predominantly shaped by the exodus from its historical roots in Western Armenia, the genesis of Iranian Armenians follows a distinct historical trajectory. The Armenian community in Iran has ancient roots dating back to the 6th century BC, when Armenians, often serving as soldiers, were integrated into the Achaemenid state. Notably, regions like Salmast, Khoi, and Urmia were originally Armenian territories before their incorporation into Persia. The formal establishment of the Armenian community is often connected to the great exile carried out by Shah Abbas around 400 years ago. This community can be viewed as a mother community from which Armenian communities in various parts of the world emerged, including those in India, Southern Asia, and several Far Eastern countries. More than 40,000 Armenians migrated from Iran to Caucasus with the Treaty of Turkmenchay. By the way, my roots are also from Khoi, and my great-grandfather, Bakhsar, reaches the territory of today's Armenia at the same time, and his grandchildren still lives in Sisian. Because of the Armenian genocide, many Armenians found safe haven in Iran, thus increasing the number of Armenians here. Until 1941, there were 2 Armenian centers in Iran, Atarpatakan and Iran-Indian. In 1941, the Diocese of Tehran was also founded. According to official statistics, there were approximately 300,000 Armenians in Iran from 1960 to 1970, and 75% of them lived in towns in this period. Armenians actively participated in the state system, economics, laws, healthcare, and education. Although Iranian Armenians were not officially recognized as a national minority, they faced challenges in religious and financial spheres, leading many to choose emigration. Between 1940 and 1955, representatives of the Communist Party left Iran, and in 1960s and 1970s, during the White Revolution of Iran, numerous young Armenians departed the country for education, did not return, and later took their family member with them. Following the Islamic Revolution in Iran, a significant number of Armenians chose to leave the country. Despite the spiritual leader of the country, Ayatollah Khomeini, assurances of safety for Iranian Armenians and the issuance of a fatwa by Ayatollah Khamenei, allowing those who have holy books, including Armenians, to conduct business and share meals with Muslims, a wave of emigration followed. Another substantial wave of emigration occurred during the Iran-Iraq War. The challenging post-war circumstances, coupled with sanctions, significantly impacted Iran's socio-economic condition. Nowadays, the majority of Armenians who remain in Iran primarily reside in three communities: Tabriz, Tehran, and Isfahan. Today, the situation for Armenians in Iran is important to think about, especially considering the complex and explosive current socio-political processes in the region. Despite a significant level of immigration within the community, the Diocese of Iranian Armenians are actively engaged in substantial efforts to safeguard the interest and well-being of Armenians. Below, we outline the structure of Armenian national authorities of the community in Iran. All three dioceses have a similar structure. I'm going to present the one in Tehran. The Armenian Diocese of Tehran is governed by the legislative and supreme authority, the Parliamentary Assembly. Members of this assembly are directly elected by the people and oversee various aspects, including national, social, religious, educational, economic, and administrative affairs. Of the total number of members of Deputies' Assembly, 6/7 are laymen and 1/7 are clergy, who are elected for a period of 4 years. It's worth mentioning that as early as 1908, Iranian Armenians gained the right to establish a national council. This highest authority for local Armenians was recognized by the state in 1911. Reasons for emigration from Iran. From 2014 to 2019, I conducted a comprehensive study aimed at understanding the current issues and challenges faced by the Armenian community in Iran. This involved interviews with the leaders from three dioceses: Armenian deputies in the Majlis, members of parliament, Assembly of Dioceses, and around 100 Armenians immigrants from Iran through online and in-person interaction. The primary focus was understanding the reason behind the emigration of Iranian Armenians, their preferred destination, and the factors influencing their choice not to consider Armenia as a final destination. Additionally, the study examined the challenges faced by Iranian Armenians, abroad their strategies for overcoming these challenges, and their consideration of returning home, be it to Iran or Armenia. Research indicates that over 70% of teenagers and young people actively participate in Iran community activities. However, the pressures of adhering to Iran's local laws, especially those affecting religious minorities, often make some young individuals seek refuge abroad. In addition to the challenging socioeconomic condition in Iran that contribute to emigration, the judicial system in Iran, where Muslim and Christian are not equal due to the higher valuation of Muslims' life, it is a significant factor. The current Iranian constitution doesn't recognize national minorities, but acknowledges religious minorities. This further complicates the issue of self-governance. According to the Article 13, Iranian Armenians, along with Zoroastrian, Assyrians, and Jews, are recognized as religious minorities with the freedom to practice their religion, conduct rituals, teach religion and language, and have separate members of the parliament. Simultaneously, certain political and military positions are restricted for individuals from religious minorities. Especially an individual of Armenian nationality who fought during Iran-Iraq war cannot currently aspire to attain a high-ranking officer position. At the same time, interviews revealed that the emigration of Armenians significantly increased not just after the Islamic Revolution and the Iran-Iraq war intensified after 1997. Only 8% of the nearly 100 surveyed individuals left the country before the Islamic Revolution. According to the respondents, the first significant wave of immigration occurred immediately after the Islamic Revolution, constituting 15%. Notably, after the revolution, there was a slight decline in immigration, according for 13%. However, the scenario shifted dramatically, approaching the number of immigration right after the Islamic Revolution. Thus, after 1997, a substantial 65% of the respondents reported immigration from Iran. After the Islamic Revolution, the Hebrew Immigration Aid Society, HIAS, an organization registered in the United States, started to organize and support the immigration of Jews from Iran. They later started facilitating the immigration of other non-Muslim groups, thus propelling the next wave of Iranian Armenians exodus. In general, they transfer non-Muslims to the West and later work on their family reunification. When discussing the reasons and the supporting factors of the Armenian immigration, the leader of Isfahan diocese, Bishop Khachatryan, says the following. The problem of Armenians' immigration is rather immense in all three dioceses. They live mostly to the west. The Jewish HIAS organization organized the logistical issues of moving Armenians to the west for a little price and thus works toward de-Armenizing Iran as a way to accomplish their shadow plans. Even the Iranian government is not able to stop the activities of this organization. According to the open information, the United States government allocated around $3 million to HIAS in order to support the exodus of non-Muslim religious minorities from Iran. Thus, most of the Armenian and the Syrian immigration of the mid-1990s up to 2015 have left Iran through this organization. When the application was approved, HIAS paid $3,000 for each family member, and then they all traveled to Austria, where they stayed until all the documentation was finalized and they could then leave for the United States. The HIAS has stopped its program of moving non-Muslims out of Iran. The reason is that Donald Trump restricted visas to travel to the United States from 8 countries, including Iran. While Iranian authorities make some efforts to retain Armenians in the country, this action falls short. In 2001, a special community to study the issues of religious minorities was established in Iran. It included representatives from all ministries addressing matters related to religious minorities. In 2014, the Ministry of Diaspora of Armenia conducted research on the activities of Armenian communities in Los Angeles, Tehran, and Moscow. Their survey indicated a notable difference in the occupational distribution among Armenians' community. In Moscow, approximately 70% are mental workers, contrasting with Iran, where only 27% fall into this category, with 55% being primarily physical workers. Los Angeles exhibits a significant shift, physical workers 6% and mental workers 45%. These trends suggest a notable immigration of Iranian Armenians with scientific potential. The majority of participants in my conducted survey have relocated to Armenia, with some also choosing the US or European countries. Interestingly, most respondents, particularly those who moved to Armenia, found integration into the host country relatively easy. One particularly intriguing question in the survey was, in my opinion, what motivated you to leave the country? 23% of the respondents had a desire to live in Armenia, and 26% had a fear of the future of living in an Islamic republic. Inter-community problems and the possibility of repatriation. Essentially, the Armenian community tends to be closed. Representatives of the Armenian community prefer to engage with each other, often keeping a distance from Iranian culture. Notably, this tendency persists even when they emigrate to other countries. For instance, in Armenia, they often live in the same buildings or neighborhoods and predominantly interact within the Iranian Armenian community. The immigration has led to decline in the use of surveys provided by national structures of the community, contributing to an increase in unused national heritage buildings. Primarily, national schools and unions are adversely affected. Numbers of schools is likely to decrease further. Armenian children predominantly attend Armenian schools, distinguished from Persian schools only by presence of the Armenian language classes. However, there is a noteworthy discrepancy as the government tends to assign weaker specialists to this Armenian school. According to an expert on Iranian education from my interview, this isn't a deliberate action. Rather, it results from assigning the best specialists to school with high student numbers. Consequently, Armenian children, upon completing their education, face challenges in competitiveness compared to the Persian school peers. It's important to mention that Iranian authorities overlook the female and male co-educational aspect of Armenian schools to ensure their continued functioning. In Iran, girls and boys generally study in separate schools. Due to declining student numbers, some schools have closed and the property sold. The head of the diocese manages these funds without being accountable to the community, a situation disliked by community representatives. One inter-community challenge stems from the interconnectedness of community activities with the Dashnaktsutun party. However, there is a group of Iranian Armenians who prefer not to align with any party but desire their voice to be recognized. For instance, the two Armenian deputies in the Majlis are traditionally affiliated with the Dashnaktsutun party. Since Armenia's independence, Iranian Armenian businessmen have attempted to establish economic ties with Armenia. The economic sanctions have significantly impacted Iranian Armenians too. The devaluation of the Iranian currency poses obstacles for these businessmen. Up until 2020, many Armenian businessmen had pinned their hopes on the prospects of repatriation to Armenia. However, post-2020, the dynamics in the region underwent a complete transformation. The ongoing developments around Iran promote us to consider that Armenian authorities should anticipate potential regional shifts and are prepared to welcome Iranian Armenians if needed. With the right politics, the financial, professional, and industrial resources of the Armenian community in Iran could be channeled toward Armenia, contributing to the nation's economic development. Iranian Armenians possess various business and engaged in industrial production. In my opinion, the leadership of Armenia should proactively plan for the possible immigration of Iranian Armenian in advance to avoid scenarios similar to immigration to and subsequent immigration from Armenia by Syrian Armenians. At the same time, Armenians in Iran possess substantial real estate and some capital. In conclusion, as population in the Middle Eastern diaspora communities are shrinking, the unfortunate trend is mirrored in the Iranian Armenian community, which is progressively decreasing. Hence, even efforts should be made to channel this flow back home to the Republic of Armenia. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers, Boris and Danush, for this great conference. Thank you very much. And it's my honor to be here and present my paper. First of all, I would like to say that this is an ongoing project, so please don't be so criticized to my approaches. So, the Armenian quarter of Jerusalem serves as a unique Armenian hub that facilitates the Armenian preservation of culture, identity, functioning as a residential area for the Armenian community. It encompasses various social and cultural institutions, all operating under the leadership of the Armenian Patriarchate of Jerusalem. After the genocide, the Armenian settlements in Palestine became a new home to thousands of refugees, as a result of which the number of Palestinian Armenians increased several times, especially in Jerusalem. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Armenians with Jewish roots or those who were married to Jews were able to move to migrate to Israel. Given Israel's repatriation policy, however, Armenians settled in non-traditional loci, such as Petah Tikva, Jaffa. Newly arrived Armenians began to organize their national life, creating Sunday schools, cultural associations, memorial sites, and unlike the Patriarchate, actively involved themselves in the political arena as well, trying to influence the Armenian-Israeli political agenda. Unable to simulate the form of profound relationship with the old community and the church, they started creating their own Armenian cultural practices, social groups, associations, and organizations in their daily routines. Thus, the immigration of Armenians changed the face of the Armenian diaspora in Israel. As a result, the newcomers, local Armenians, two different Armenian communities, faced the imperative of interact effectively. So the focus of my research is the correlation between these two old and new communities. And I'm interested in the level of involvement of Jerusalem Armenians, the Patriarchate, and the traditional political parties in addressing the social cultural concerns of the new community. This research also makes a special reference to the effect of national issues, for example, 44 Days Artsakh War, Armenian genocide, the Easter ceremony, and of course, Goverun Bardes, on the relationship, on the dynamics between the old and the new communities. The main questions of my research, among others, are, for instance, why did the Church and the Patriarchate not create the same strong ties with the newcomers? Why are the newcomers not part of daily practices of local community and the Church? The Armenian Patriarchate of Jerusalem is used to serve as the spiritual center for Armenians of Palestine, Syria, and Lebanon, and nowadays it serves the spiritual center for Armenians of Israel and West Bank, and also for Jordan. It's playing a crucial role in the religious culture and communal life of the Armenian communities of Jerusalem, Haifa, Tel Aviv, Bethlehem. As both religious and national institutions, the Patriarchate has been instrumental in preserving Armenian Christian traditions and rights over the holy places. It oversees numerous churches, monasteries, and educational institutions within the city and its environment, including the St. James Monastery. The Patriarchate is deeply involved in the administration of the Armenian quarter of Jerusalem, maintaining Armenian culture and religious landmarks. The Patriarchate owns a huge amount of properties around the monastery in Jerusalem and Jaffa, which are inhabited by civilian Armenians for free or very, very low rent. Good relations between the Patriarchate and Palestinian Arabs have long existed. When the United Nations decided to partition plan on November 29, 1947, the Patriarchate firmly backed the proposal, which called for Jerusalem to have its own guardianship and international status. The Palestinians, however, rejected this plan, and on May 14, 1948, a war broke out with the declaration of Israel's independence. As a result, the old city of Jerusalem remained under Jordanian rule until 1967, during which the relation of the Patriarchate and the local Armenian community depended with the Palestinian Arabs and the Jordanian authorities. At the same time, the Armenian Church of Jaffa, surrounded by the local Armenian community, and the Armenian community of Haifa remained under Israeli control, keeping their strong ties with the Palestinian Arabs. So now about the pre-genocide and post-genocide communities. Over the centuries, a small lay community was formed around the Patriarchate, which gradually grew and occupied almost 1/6 of the old city. And also it's known also Armenian Quarter of Jerusalem. St. Nicholas Church of Jaffa and the Church of the Nativity of Bethlehem also formed similar ancient communities around themselves. The pre-genocide Palestinian and Armenian community has a dual identity. Apart from the Armenian one, which was firmly realized, especially through the church, they can be considered an Arabic-speaking community. It mainly maintains its Armenian identity in Arab environment with a strong connection to the church, avoiding intermarriages with foreigners. And instead, in order to avoid assimilation, even went to consanguineous marriages within the community. The situation changed dramatically when, following the Armenian genocide, a large number of Armenians were exiled to Palestine, among other Middle Eastern Arab countries, establishing refuge not only in pre-existing communities, but also in Haifa, for example. Unlike the pre-genocide community, which was Arabic-speaking and had strong ties with the church, the post-genocide community was Turkish-speaking, most of whom were deported from Cilicia. The Armenian Patriarchate provided lodging for almost 4,000 refugees in its hundreds of rooms located in Armenian Quarter. The indigenous Arabized Armenians of Jerusalem characterized themselves as locals, or in Armenian Khachatryan, citizen, while they called Turkishized refugees guests, or in Arabic Zuvar. So Khachatryan and Zuvar had different ways and traditions. However, coexisting within the same loci, the Armenian community of Jerusalem underwent new changes. In the beginning, there was tension between pre-genocide and post-genocide communities, the reason for which was primarily socio-economic. The refugees, being from local classes, were often openly despised by the pre-genocide community. The disdain of the pre-genocide community towards the refugees was also noticeable, as the latter avoided establishing marital or other social ties with them, even preferring consanguineous marriages, as I mentioned, to marrying the immigrants. My interviewees testify that the second generations of the pre-genocide and post-genocide communities integrated each other to a great extent, occurring a new identity, which was called Vanketsi in the Armenian Quarter, which essentially meant born and grow up in the Armenian Quarter. The pre-genocide and post-genocide communities are mostly still integrated into the Arab-Palestinian environment of Israel. Their Hebrew knowledge is still weak, the children don't serve in Israeli army, and they have a clear critical attitude towards the state of Israel. In the old community of Jerusalem, for instance, there are few Israeli citizens. Despite this, almost all of them have Israeli identity cards, which gave them the opportunity to use all the social services, privileges, and rights provided by the state, except the right to vote and to be elected. And the connection with the Armenian Republic is very weak. Now about the new Armenian community, whom I call newcomers. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, many Armenians forced to immigrate to various developed countries, including Israel. According to Israeli law on repatriation, or as it's well known, Aliyah, Armenians could immigrate to Israel mainly in two ways. Either they had to prove that they had Jewish roots, or they had to marry a Jewish person or simply marry an Israeli citizen. Unlike the former community of refugees after the genocide, the representatives of the new community didn't find refuge in or around the Armenian Quarter of Jerusalem, in the vicinity of the Armenian churches of Haifa and Jaffa. Rather, they primarily found shelter in Israel's major industrial, commercial, and social centers, Tel Aviv, Bat Yam, Ashdod, Petah Tikva, Haifa, and Beersheba. Today, approximately 2,000 newcomers live in Haifa, 3,000 in Tel Aviv and its surrounding cities and suburbs, and 500 in the southern part of Israel. This community of newcomers, unlike the old community, is highly integrated into Israeli society because they immediately after immigrating received citizenship, then took accelerated Hebrew language courses, which known Ulpan. Adults started working at the first opportunity, and children started to study in Israeli schools and colleges, young people in Israeli higher education institutions, and they served in Israeli army without gender differentiation. Newcomers have a strong connection with the Republic of Armenia. They visit Armenia frequently because they have friends and relatives in Armenia, and among the newcomers, there are many newcomers who do intellectual work in nearly every Israeli sector. Newcomers organize themselves in their new localities, opening public organizations and unions such as Nairi and Ararat unions. There are Sunday school in Petah Tikva, Haifa and Jaffa, and the first opened by the efforts of the Nairi Union, the other two by the efforts of the clergy of Armenian origin. They also advocated and actively engaged in lobbying for national issues, such as the initiative to create a genocide monument in Petah Tikva and the opening of a small Armenian genocide square in the city center of Haifa. Now, the relationship between the Patriarchate and all the new community. As for relationship between the church and the old community, with the new community, everything here is quite complicated. According to the interviews, the old community calls the newcomers Russian Armenians, and the newcomers call the old community Arab Armenians. Many newcomers testified that they were once blamed by the old community members for immigrated from the Republic of Armenia. Newcomers having Jewish roots or being married to a Jew are perceived by the church and the old community as Jewish Armenians, despite the fact that the latter attend church, speak Armenian, and in their everyday practices of expressing their Armenian identity have nothing to do with the Jewish tradition or identity. In turn, the newcomers consider the Armenians of the old community to be Arabized Armenians because most of them speak Arabic, look like Arabs in their everyday practices, and are more connected to the Arab environment. The newcomers don't attend either the political parties of the old community or the youth clubs attached to them. The absence of relationship between these old and new communities is also dependent on the different attitudes of the latter political attitudes towards the State of Israel. This was obvious when, after the annexation of Jerusalem by Israel in 1967, the Jerusalem Armenians didn't take Israeli citizenship, while the newcomers never saw any problem in applying for getting Israeli citizenship. Another fact is that if the newcomer serves in the Israeli army willingly, sometimes even with great desire, there are almost no such among the old community. Among the Armenians, who mostly choose Palestinian among the Armenians of the old community, there are a small number of those who studied in Israeli universities, who mostly choose Palestinian universities. And contrary to this, newcomers mostly seek to get an education in Israeli educational institutions, which don't have any language barriers at all. Newcomers have a weak connection with the church, which mainly has two reasons. First, until the 1990s, almost all clergymen of the congregation were from Middle Eastern countries, being close to the old community with their identity, having been born in and living in Arab countries, and being curious of Arabic culture and language. They don't consider new Armenians as real Armenians. Clergymen born in Arab countries, for example, says me that these newcomers is not Armenian, they are Jewish. The relationship between the church and newcomers is more complicated, especially when someone dies. Previously, one representatives of the old Armenian community were buried in the Armenian cemetery of Haifa, Jaffa, or Jerusalem, which belongs to the Patriarchate. After the 1990s, with the arrival of newcomers, after their death, one of the clergy of Jaffa and Haifa, who is again a clergyman born in one of the Arab countries, after the death of a newcomer Armenian, refused to give him a place and bury him in the Armenian cemetery, arguing that he can't bury a Jew in the Armenian cemetery, despite the fact that the decedent was Armenian. Even though the old community and the church are in daily weak ties with the new community, they still act together in matters of national nature during great church holidays. To study this aspect of the relationship, I consider exploring their participation in two national events, one of low-key significance and the other of nationwide significance, as well as the participation of two communities and the church in one major church holiday and one national memorial ceremony. For example, their participation for the Armenian Eastern ceremony. The Patriarchate, which has equal rights with the Greeks to bring out the Christian light from the tomb of Christ on Easter, leads a procession from the door of the St. James Armenian Monastery to the Holy Sepulchre, accompanied by a large crowd of the old and new communities, mixed with that of the pilgrims. The bands of the scout groups of the old community Dashnag and Ramgavar parties usually accompany the procession with drums and their flags. Having participated in this ceremony in 2015, I can state that during the ceremony, the old and new communities jointly take part in this agenda, which is the nature of the day. The next ceremony is the Armenian Genocide Remembrance Day. On April 24, this memorial service commemorating the victims of Armenian genocide, the main components of this ceremony, which took place prior to the creation of new community, including a liturgy in St. James Monastery, honoring the genocide victims, and the congregational procession to the 7 Cross Stone Memorial of the Armenian Genocide, erected in Armenian Quarter of Jerusalem. Every year on April 24, the congregation, Jerusalemite Armenians, as well as the representatives from the old and new communities of Haifa and Jaffa, until 2020, I'm following myself. Every year on April 24, the congregation Jerusalem Armenians, as well as the representatives from the old and new communities of Haifa and Jaffa, until 2020, along with many other Armenians, gather at the front of these cross stones to take part in the commemoration ceremony together. But from the beginning 2020, the newcomers used to come to Jerusalem on April 24 to commemorate the Armenian genocide. But the Armenian of Petah Tikva, for example, were able to erect their Armenian genocide monument in one of the central parks of the city, after which they have been gathering near this monument for several years now. Following this, there are protests by both old and new communities in front of the Turkish embassy in Tel Aviv and the consulate in Jerusalem, and it becomes kind of tradition. Next is the struggle of Armenian community of Jerusalem, this Koverun Bardes. Regarding this issue of Koverun Bardes, the Garden of Cows, which is a controversial deal by the Patriarchate in Jerusalem in recent months, the old community of Jerusalem demonstrated against the Patriarchate and applied for a permanent sit-in in the Garden of Cows, and only a few active members of the new community visited to them. It means that newcomers don't involve in this kind of sit-in processes. Yeah. The next is 44 days of Karabakh War. At the same time, the two communities collaborated throughout the 44-day Karabakh War in 2020, which was mostly organized through active charitable operations through the church. And here you can see the demonstrations that they organized. So my conclusion. The results of my research shows that the daily contact between the local communities and newcomers is almost non-existent. The newcomers in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv and Haifa didn't settle around the Patriarchate, the church or local communities, like those who come to Palestine after the Armenian genocide. Moreover, the relations of the newcomers are also complicated with the church and the Patriarchate, and they are in no way comparable to the relations between the church and the old community, which are more or less interconnected. And I argue that the local collective identities of the old and new Armenian communities have a great influence of their relationship, which dominate over their national collective identities during daily interactions. Although the old and new communities act unitedly or as unitedly as possible in national issues, commemoration of the victims of genocide, for example, Easter ceremonies, and the conducting, for example, charity projects during the Karabakh War, nevertheless, in their daily practices, they give way to their local identities. In other words, Arab and Israeli identities of the old and new communities, according to the logic of the Arab-Israeli conflict, fail the daily contacts of the old and new communities. However, in national issues, when the issue is related to events to nationwide importance, the old and new communities, together with the church, act unitedly, creating the false impression of always acting together. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for the organizers and sponsors to put us today together here. My presentation name is The Revitalization of the Armenian Community in Mexico. Unlike other Armenian communities in Latin America, such as Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, or Venezuela, The Armenian community in Mexico have never managed to establish solid institutions that will allow it to maintain its transnational connections or internal cohesion in a sustainable manner. Even though the origins of the Armenian community in Mexico can be traced to the 17th century, the Armenians in Mexico did not form a true community for quite a while. They were isolated individuals or small family groups. This changed in 1923 with the arrival of more Armenians who, due to the entry bans in the United States, settled temporarily in Mexico City and Tijuana while resolving their immigration documents. This photograph, property of the Matoyan family in Fresno, summarized the essence of the migratory journey and sheds light on the reasons behind the Armenian arrival in Mexico. With the exception of the baby cradled in someone's arm, who was born in Tijuana, the remaining 31 individuals arrived mostly from various regions of the former Ottoman Empire, mainly from Harpert. There are also some from Van, and at least one person from Caracalla in Kars, with the former Russian Empire. The group stands atop on one of Tijuana's hills, with the United States border evident on the horizon, just 2 kilometers away, their dream destination. Nevertheless, lacking the mandatory visa, crossing into the United States is forbidden, compelling them to wait in the city until they obtain the visa. During the First World War, Armenians were unable to immigrate to America. After the war, as immigration once again became possible, a record 10,000 arrived in 1920, and around 20,000 more entered by 1924. Armenian immigration came to a near halt after 1924, when the U.S. Congress imposed restrictive quotas on immigration. And the Act of 1924 mandated that each immigrant had to secure a visa issued by a United States consular officer, requiring the presentation of evidence confirming nationality, as well as demonstrating character, conduct, and financial standing. These quota laws not only led to the establishment of stranded Armenian communities in both Mexico and Cuba, but also affected Jews, Greeks, Italians, and other nationalities facing similar exclusion. Yet, the act allowed for the entry of wives and children under 18 years of age of United citizens without quota limitations. That's the reason, in the photo, that many of them are women, some single, others accompanied by their sons and daughters, whose husbands reside in the United States. Tijuana served a momentary stop on their migratory journey, a phenomenon described as step immigrants, characterized by multiple stops or stages in their journey to the United States. One of the members of the photo is Avedico Sababian, a native of Caracalla in the province of Kars. In 1926, the Caracalla group settled in Tijuana consisted of around 100 individuals, all adherent of the spiritual Christian sect known as Priguni, or Armenian Molokans. The term Priguni, jump in Russian, originates from their practice of jumping during worship. Yet they also engage in prophecy, speaking in tongues, and singing, praying while they being moved by the Holy Spirit. These rituals were integral to their religious practices before their immigration from Kars, mainly to Boyle Heights in Los Angeles. During their momentary time in Mexico, and due to their limited number, the construction of a temple was not possible. Nevertheless, they were able to rent spaces to conduct their religious ceremonies, including the 2 Protestant temples existing in Tijuana at the time. It is certain that by 1926, the Priguni Armenians were practicing their faith, which motivated controversy among the city's residents. This sentiment is echoed in a letter by the president of the Municipal Council of Tijuana that says that certain temples or residences were where groups of Armenians gather, it was reported that these gatherings were marked by excessive noise from singing and other practices, causing disturbance to the neighborhood. And then they ordered the closure for these establishments. It's interesting that Tijuana, with a lot of brothels and bars, could be like Armenians making this noise, could disturb the neighborhood. The description provided by the president of the Municipal Council of Tijuana aligns with the distinctive practices of the Priguni sect. Then it is probable, as this document shows, that the Priguni from Caracalla were the first to gather for a totally Armenian religious celebration in Mexico. There is no precedent of a Lusabor-Chagan Catholic or Protestant Armenian religious gathering. All the information concerning the difficulties at the church with the Priguni Armenians and the Tijuana government is highlighted by a letter wrote by the evangelical doctor Antaramian Iskanderyan, a medical doctor who migrated to Mexico from the U.S. in 1925 and who was residing in Mexico City in 1926. In this letter, Iskanderyan advocates for the reopening of these temples, affirming that the Armenian colony will respect and obey the Mexican laws regulating religious practices. I believe he was employed by the United Armenian Immigration and Welfare Societies of America, as the president, Simova Abkarian, was his colleague. This organization, after the quota laws, tried to settle Armenians in different countries, following the Jewish example, sending telegrams to the Mexican authorities, even to the President Obregón. And Iskanderyan proposed at least 3 times projects aimed at relocating thousands of Armenians in Mexico, although these initiatives never succeed. They proposed to use a couple of $1 million to settle a few thousand Armenians, sponsored for 1 year with 2 cows, 2 horses, etc. Andranik Iskanderyan was a key member of the community, an organizer and leader, linked to the Armenians in the U.S. and with the capacity to deal with the Mexican authorities. Also, an evangelical pastor and professor, he organized a community picnic in 1929, bringing together numerous members of the Armenian community for a day of fellowship and recreation. I think most of them were Lusabor-Chagans, but data from the census for foreigners conducted by the Ministry of Interior in 1931, 2 years after, shows that 64% of the Armenians consider themselves to be Roman Catholic, while 26% adhere to Lusabor-Chagan or Armenian Apostolic beliefs, and 5% were affiliated with Protestant denominations. All the Priguni already migrated to Los Angeles. The significant proportion of Armenians identified as Roman Catholics in Mexico is important, suggesting that conversion or self-identification as Roman Catholic may have been a strategic move to mitigate the risk of rejection from the local community. This, combined with the absence of a national church, play fundamental roles in facilitating Armenian integration into Mexican society. Today, despite facing challenges such as the inability to establish a church or a permanent school, the community created in 1925 a soccer team founded by members of Tashnaksutyun, which persisted under various names until the 70s. Branches of both Tashnaksutyun in 1926 and Parekort-Sagan in the 30s were also established. Despite efforts to preserve cultural identity, assimilation became a reality for many Armenian families in Mexico. Migration patterns also play a significant role, with many Armenians moving to the United States, particularly after the Second World War. While some managed to retain certain traditions and language, others assimilated more fully into the Mexican society. However, until the 70s, the community in Mexico City, like the one in Tijuana, continued to struggle with the challenge of assimilation and striving to preserve its cultural heritage. Starting in 1991, Mexico once again became a transit destination for Armenian migration. Its proximity to the United States and its status as the border with the world's greatest amount of illegal human trafficking resulted in many Armenians passing through Mexico on their way to the United States. In 2023, a shocking 2 million individuals undertook this journey. 30% of them are Mexicans, 24% from the Northern Triangle countries, but now we have diverse regions such as Venezuela, Cuba, China, Africa, India, Central Asia, and of course also Armenians, that the number rose from 362 people in 2019 to 3,271 in 2022. Yet these Armenians only pass through Mexico. Perhaps for a few days or months, their interest lies in crossing and reaching Glendale or Los Angeles. But there is a more fascinating migration, beginning from the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the living conditions in Armenia between 1991 and 1995. In my opinion, this migration, with its significant scientific and cultural impact, activism, and political dynamism, has brought a revitalization of the Armenian community in Mexico. These Armenians, principally Armenian women, whose contributions in the fields of science, art, and notably music have transformed the community into an example for the Mexican society. The original Armenian community in Mexico, established since 1923, has produced a significant number of scientists from the second generation born in Mexico. Additionally, they have received significant contributions from individuals who married Mexicans and decide to settle in the country, like the dancer and writer Armeno Hanian from Shamaha, who married a Mexican diplomat in the 20s and settled in Mexico City. Paris Pishmish from Belize, the first doctor in astronomy to arrive in Mexico. Shahen Asian, also from Belize, Mambel Sarkisian, author of A History of Transcaucasia, who settled in Yucatan, the historian Carlos M. Patasadurian from Córdoba, Argentina, and others. But like the Armenians from the 20th century, they are mostly isolated individuals with no community connections. After 1991, due to the relationship between the Buracan Observatory and the Tonantzintla Observatory in Puebla, Mexico attracted some notorious astronomers and astrophysicists who found employment opportunities due to their exceptional qualification and their relationship with Mexican scientists. In the field of orchestral music, Armenian musicians from Armenia have formed a significant presence. Nearly 40 specialists in strings, viola, violin, cello, along with singers, pianists, and music theory teachers, have established themselves in Mexico. The first arrivals date back to 1988, with a significant influx between 1992 and 1996, coinciding with the establishment of many orchestras in Mexico and open competitions for musicians worldwide. Compelled by challenging conditions in Armenia and the attraction of favorable salary and working conditions, where fluency in Spanish was not a requirement, a network facilitated the migration of numerous musicians from Yerevan, often under employment contracts. Presently, they are integrated into various orchestras across Mexico. Some of them, 38 of 2,500 community, that's 1.8% of the community of the Armenians of the community who play in orchestras, and they are scattered all over Mexico. This Hayastansi community, settled in diverse cities such as Acapulco, Querétaro, and Ensenada, established contact with the existing Armenian community, at times resulting in mutual disenchantment, with the construction of mutual negative stereotypes of each other, a topic I will develop in my paper. The discourse between the two communities also reactivated interest in Armenia, brought to the surface motivation to publicize the Karabakh conflict, and resulted in a new militancy for the recognition of the Armenian genocide. This cooperation was motivated in part by the fact that since 2011, the Azerbaijani embassy in Mexico embarked on an intensive campaign Initially, they orchestrated a strategic move to convince both the Chamber of Deputies and the Senate to pass resolutions recognizing the events in Khojaly as genocide. These resolutions were successfully adopted on September 2011. Mexico was the first country to recognize this as genocide. However, the embassy's subsequent attempt to erect a monument in honor of the dictator Heydar Aliyev provoked controversy and dominated headlines for several days. This move produced extensive protest, leading to a significant mobilization of journalists, human rights activists, and also members of the Armenian community. The controversial statue was eventually removed, although the park and commemorative plaques remain. The Armenian community in Mexico underwent a notable awakening, particularly in the realms of politics, following accusations by President Aliyev implicating them in the controversy. This was represented in a revealing statement by President Ilham Aliyev, who said that lobbying by the Armenian diaspora is Azerbaijan's principal enemy. Lacking any kind of political, educational, or religious organization, the Armenian community in Mexico, at the precise moment in 2012, consisted of isolated families with no form of community representation. However, it does include figures recognized for their entrepreneurial or academical labors, such as the former rector of the UNAM, National University of Mexico, José Saruhán, whose activity in support of the movement to remove the statue and opposition to the points of agreement was expressed in 2 articles and interviews in different media outlets. But from there to argue that Mexico's Armenian community was manipulated by imaginary strings emanating from the Armenian embassy in Washington to orchestrate a worldwide campaign to have the statue of Heydar Aliyev carted off entails insinuations of Armenian machinations to divert attention from the Mexican intellectuals and proponents of human rights who oppose erecting a statue of a dictator and placing a plaque that describes an episode as genocide with no historical, legal, or moral basis whatsoever. Indeed, the erection of the statue stimulated the Armenian community. But more important, as a response, the Republic of Armenia decided to establish an embassy in Mexico. This move transformed the embassy into a hub where both the Hayastan Sea and the Mexican Armenians converge, raising a new synergy in support of Armenia. This convergence produced notable results, with the most significant being the Mexican Senate's formal recognition of the Armenian genocide in 2023. But again, it wasn't a church, a political party, or organization that made it possible, but isolated individuals, like Jacques Khachatryan in Michoacán. Originally from Lebanon, he moved to Canada and after marrying a Mexican, moved to Michoacán state. He became recently the consul of the Republic of Armenia in Michoacán, and is also the president of the Lebanese Society of Michoacán. His political links and influence is very notorious. He was instrumental in passing a resolution recognizing the Armenian genocide in the local parliament, or erecting khachkars, the first in a public square in Mexico, in Panindícuaro, a small town where there's no Armenian and never had an Armenian presence. The Armenian community in Michoacán is very small. In addition to the Sahakian family in Morelia, the state capital, the family of Alain Avakian, Armenians from France, in Uruapan, the family of the Ethiopian-born Armenian painter Batche Gebjelian in Erongarikuaro, near Lake Pátzcuaro, and myself in Zamora. So, in the state, the Armenians do not exceed 15 people in number. Then why in this town there 3 khachkars were installed? Jacques Sahakian tells me that the reason has been his friendship with Major Lopez Menendez, who has invited him to invest in the town, which has around 18,000 inhabitants. And also because khachkars, he says, are like the Armenians. They settle in remote places that seem isolated from the rest of the world, but they always carry the Armenian culture in their hearts, like the symbols of eternity that the cross stones have at their center. I think my time has. But probably most more important is Armenak Yeritzian, who is an Armenian from Armenia who established himself as a prominent figure in the construction industry in Querétaro, and he has played a fundamental role in advocating for the recognition of the Armenian genocide by the Mexican Senate in 2023. I think with this I finish. Thank you.
Okay, so this paper's title is Brothers in Arms, Brothers in Spirit, Diasporization of Karabakhis in Armenia and Hamshens in Abkhazia. This paper aims to shed light on the issue of post-Soviet Armenian diaspora communities in the post-Cold War period since 1991. A number of frozen conflicts in Transnistria, South Ossetia, Abkhazia and Nagorno-Karabakh, which marked this period, start to unfreeze at the fringes of the former Soviet Union. In the following, we look into two examples of Armenian communities of such contested states in the South Caucasus. Abkhazia, situated on the Black Sea coast, and Nagorno-Karabakh or Artsakh, situated on the mountain range between Armenia and Azerbaijan. At the end of the Soviet Union, the former autonomous Soviet Socialist republics Abkhazia and Nagorno-Karabakh claimed their right to self-determination and declared themselves independent from the republics of Georgia and Azerbaijan respectively. Founded on the ashes of violent conflict and forced displacement, these two de facto states under the patronage of Russia and Armenia have been lacking international acknowledgement. While Abkhazia, with its large Armenian-speaking Hamshen population, continues to struggle for recognition, the future of Artsakh is uncertain. As both Georgia and Armenia aspire to Western values, their alienation from the Russian Federation has adverse consequences for the historically grown ties between Armenians in Armenia and other post-Soviet states. In this paper, we will ask the following questions. Do Hamshens and Artsakhtsis relate to a homeland? Do they refer to other Armenian diasporas, diaspora communities, and if yes, why and in which way? We base our observations on qualitative research from our fieldworks in Abkhazia, Nagorno-Karabakh, and Armenia from 2019 to the end of 2023, and on critical analysis of interviews with key informants and debates in social media and newspapers.
So before presenting the specific characteristics of the Hamshen Armenians of Abkhazia, we should outline in this short section the evolution of relations between them and the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh. So these community-to-community relations began in the early 90s during the wars of independence in Abkhazia, 92 to 93, and Nagorno-Karabakh from 88 to 94. Galus Trabizonian, who is a veteran from Abkhazia war and at the time of the interview in February 2020, president of the Organization of Armenians from Abkhazia, said that during the Abkhazian war, the first help came from Nagorno-Karabakh. So maybe this relationship therefore began with the war and continued between 1994 and 2020 through the prism of bilateral relations between the republics of Abkhazia and Nagorno-Karabakh, which mutually recognized each other following their respective military victories. And these relations had to cease in 2020. In this context, the Abkhazian Armenians were seen by the Abkhaz authorities as facilitators for the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh. These bilateral relations have taken several forms. Political relations first. So this can be illustrated by the visits by Abkhazian delegations to Nagorno-Karabakh. For example, in August 2019, Abkhazian Armenians were taking part in these visits, as in May 2019. For instance, and symbolically, the Abkhazian Ministry of Foreign Affairs sent until 2022 a congratulatory message to Nagorno-Karabakh on the occasion of its Independence Day, celebrating the, I'm quoting, struggle for liberation, construction and development of an independent state, end of the quote. Cultural and sportive relations then. So concerts have been organized, for example in Sukhumi, Sukhum for the Abkhazians, by the Artsakh National Ensemble on December 10, 2019, for the last time, in collaboration with the Ministries of Culture of Abkhazia and Artsakh. The annual CONIFA soccer competition has also helped forge ties between the two republics, which have found themselves playing against each other several times. And this makes a lot of sense, of course, in terms of recognition and self-recognition as an independent political entity. In 2019, for example, this soccer competition was held in Stepanakert, in Artsakh, and an Abkhazian delegation took part. Secondly, in terms of relations between the Armenian of Abkhazia and Nagorno-Karabakh, it is interesting to note that their proximity in terms of identity, but also in terms of self-identification with the Armenian homeland, has created bridges. On a cultural level first, the publication of poems by the Abkhazian Armenian poet Artavaz Taretyan in Nagorno-Karabakh illustrates the possibility of cultural links between the two communities. And in terms of their relationship with Armenia, both communities share the trait of existing within entities unrecognized by the international community and unrecognized by Armenia in particular. This has created a sense of frustration for both communities, leading, for example, Galus Trabizonian, to remind the president of the Armenian community of Abkhazia at the time of the interview, to say that, I'm quoting, if Armenia could recognize us in Abkhazia, it would recognize the independence of Artsakh. Trabizonian even declares that he visits Nagorno-Karabakh 4 or 5 times a year and that, quote, our relations with Artsakh are very good, better than with Armenia, end of the quote. The memory of war so strongly links these two communities since they both took part in independence struggles. Again, Galus Trabizonian asserts in an interview that in 2016, the Armenians of Abkhazia sent a small regiment to Nagorno-Karabakh, as they did in November 20, as you see on the picture. Unfortunately, this regiment went too late and only arrived on the 9th of November. The memory of the struggle over and above shared identity traits, although the Armenians of Abkhazia and Artsakh each have their own specificities, and the ambiguous relationship with Armenia have truly made these two Armenian communities brothers in arms. Their struggles have in fact been comparable at least until 2020, and their expectations of the outside world and of Armenia were equally so.
The experience of the 12 months Azerbaijani blockade of Nagorno-Karabakh and the last escalation of the conflict in September 2023 have left deep traces in the memories of refugees. Since then, over 100,000 former residents of Artsakh, almost the whole population, fled in a massive exodus and is trying to settle in Armenia or beyond. For decades, the lack of recognition of Artsakh by Armenia and Armenia's distancing from providing military support during the last conflict escalation has deeply shattered the trust among Artsakhites in the Armenian government. This trend is reinforced in the strongly rejecting attitude displayed by Armenian authorities towards expressions of distinct community identity of Artsakh people and their government that struggles to perpetuate its existence in exile and wishes to remain in Armenia. When the conflict escalated in 2022, rumors flared up, stirred by Georgian and Abkhaz nationalists, that warned of a wave of Karabakh Armenians resettling in Abkhazia and thereby threatening to tilt the balance and claim a far more important political place. This reminds of the accusation made by Azerbaijan in the past that Artsakh was populated with ethnic Armenians to tilt the demographic balance in their favor. Thus, the problem of constituting a minority that might be perceived as a threat by the titular nation will continue to pose itself also for Artsakhites now in Armenia. After all, which place did and does Artsakh occupy for Armenia? A part of the homeland or a diaspora community which used to be outside of its borders and is now coming home? How is this contradictory relation mirrored in the perceptions of displaced Artsakhites in the process of their emplacement in Armenia? Let me now present some insights from Artsakh refugees with whom I met during the last quarter of 2023 in Armenia. I selected 3 positionings which correspond more or less to the 3 degrees of self-identification as a diaspora community member, which there are 1 assimilated, 2 symbolic, occasional, and 3 committed. Example 1 is from an interview with a man from Iskanderyan who is running a children's show in Gyumri. He is convinced that people should not fight over land, and since the Azeris have taken hold of Artsakh now, there is no place for him there anymore. I quote, "I will stay here in Gyumri. The people here treat us well. They make no distinctions between Armenians and us. I perform for our children and for children from here. They love together. This is what matters to me." End of quote. He had been living and working in Artsakh since his parents moved there after the earthquake in 1988, when he still was a small boy. His father keeps living in Artsakh against all odds, although his son tried to convince him. When the son begs his father to come to Armenia because he's worried for him, his father tells him to come back home where he is keeping toys for his grandchildren, expecting their return. From his statement, I observe that he is assimilating rather quickly in Armenia, even though his father is a constant reminder of his lost home, and the separation is questioning his decision. Example 2 is taken from an interview with grandparents and her granddaughter from Stepanakert, with whom I met in Massis. The family was comparatively well established in their new home. The girl wanted to show me her drawing. When I asked her about the cat, she told me, and I quote, "The moment we stopped on the way, the cat jumped out of the car and ran away." End of quote. Then tears welled up in her eyes and she could not speak further. Her grandmother explained to me that they tried to offer her to have a new cat, but she refused. The grandparents stated they were missing their home and if possible would like to return. By the way how the girl was affected by the loss she suffered and the importance given to her drawing by the family, I observed that the memory of their lost home is kept alive in the family, and that they may maintain a symbolic identification. Example 3 is from an interview with a mother and her son from Iskanderyan, whom I met in Vanadzor. The grandparents were both mourning the loss of their home, their land, their livelihood and traditions. Their house burned down, so they were firmly decided not to ever return. The grandson had told his grandmother, and I quote, "Let us keep our shoes from the time at home. We used to walk in them when we were back home. Let us not wear them anymore, but keep them as a memory." End of quote. The same boy is reluctant to adopt the other pupil's Lori accent of Armenian and prefers to preserve his own accent. The grandmother had prepared jingle of huts the way they used to prepare it at home. From the way this family deals with memory objects and customs, I understand they are committed to preserve their distinct identity and may transmit their memories to the next generations. From these quotes becomes clear that at present Artsakhtsis consider Artsakh as their homeland and in the first place, and that Armenia is now becoming a second homeland. Among Artsakh diaspora communities in the Russian Federation, support is mobilized for displaced Artsakhtsis settling in Tavush. The way how the Armenian authorities organized the settlement of Artsakhtsis in Armenia shows that they wanted to prevent collective settlement out of fear of a political momentum threatening their power. There is ongoing resettlement of Artsakhtsis within Armenia and outside of Armenia, Russia being the most easily accessible thanks to family links, economic, profitable and preferred destination.
The vast majority of Abkhazians, Armenians, from their side, arrived in Abkhazia in the 1870s and 1880s from the regions of Ordu, Trabzon, Janik, Riz and Artvin, fleeing Hamidian massacres and forced conversions to Islam. These Armenians still identify themselves today as Hamshen. Another wave of Armenian immigration occurred during and shortly after the Armenian genocide of 1915, albeit on a small scale. Almost 100 years later, in 1989, Armenians made up almost 15% of the population of Abkhazia, with 76,500 individuals. During the Soviet period, the Abkhazian SSR was a multicultural territory in which the various communities maintained their identities through national schools. Individuals were assigned certain identities by the Soviet administration. Nationality was written on official documents, and self-assigned within the communities who maintained their own stories, rituals, and languages and dialects. In 1979, there were still 57 Armenian schools in Abkhazia, teaching, among other subjects, Eastern Armenian and Armenian history. In 2019, the Armenian schools in Abkhazia's first Armenian village, Mtsara, celebrated in its 114th anniversary. During the Soviet period, the Armenians of Abkhazia were closely linked to their Armenian homeland, the Armenian SSR, where many studied. All of them, thanks to the Armenian national schools, spoke Eastern Armenian, Russian, and Hamshen with their families and friends in Abkhazia. In addition, Abkhazian Armenian artists formed literary unions, collaborated with those in Tbilisi and Yerevan. The war in Abkhazia completely reversed the situation. Some Armenian villages were attacked by Georgian irregulars, and some decided to join the war alongside the Abkhazians, forming the famous Baghramian battalion. This episode greatly contributed to giving Armenians a prominent place in the political apparatus of Abkhazia's ethnic democracy right after the war, compared to the other nationalities such as Russians in Abkhazia, which remained neutral on the whole. Nevertheless, the construction of Abkhazian ethnic democracy, in which only an Abkhaz can be a presidential candidate and where mechanisms of ethnic favoritism for administrative and judicial positions were implemented, locked Abkhazian Armenians into a stagnant position of loyal nationality but non-native. The myth of initial hospitality, far from being anecdotal, is indeed at the heart of the Abkhazian state mechanisms of identitarian assignment, as illustrated by the April 24, 2020 message from the then Abkhazian president Aslan Bjania to the Armenians of Abkhazia. So, quote, "Tens of thousands of Armenians forced to leave their homes in the Ottoman Empire found salvation in Abkhazia. Our people have sheltered and helped people in difficulty to survive. The representatives of the Armenian diaspora gratefully serve Abkhazia, which has become their second homeland." At this point, the Armenians of Abkhazia were faced with three anchor points in their identity-building process. First, their homeland in present-day Turkey. This territory is seated only in connection with the pain of exile, with what was and will never be again. At Artavasd Saretsian, the poet, for example, in a collection of poems published in 2018, refers to Hamshen in connection with a walnut tree in Ahrit, Ahrit being an Armenian village in the province of Trebizond, most of whose inhabitants died on the roads to exile. The Hamshen origin is also maintained by the dialects of Trebizond, Ordu, Janik, Riz, and Artvin, and by the Hamshen festival generally organized in Abkhazia in November for the Hamshen Harvest Festival. But also evoked on every April 24 when the community gathers to lay roses in the Black Sea that are said to be going to find the shores from which their ancestors went into exile. Second, their homeland in present-day Armenia. Apart from the Soviet period, Abkhazian Armenians have never really considered Armenia as a territory to be their homeland. Moreover, the end of the USSR made it difficult for Abkhazian students to study in Armenia, not least for financial and logistical reasons. It used to be enough, for example, to take a train from Sukhumi to Yerevan, but nowadays you have to fly from Sochi in Russia. Armenia's lack of knowledge of that Armenian diaspora, of its cultural and linguistic features, and Armenia's non-recognition of Abkhazia has also led to frustration among Abkhazian Armenians. When they emigrate, they then prefer Russia, particularly the cities of Krasnodar and Sochi, where many Hamshen Armenians like themselves live. And finally, the second homeland in Abkhazia. Abkhazian Armenians are integrated into Abkhazian political life to a lesser extent, still had 24 national Armenian schools in 2020, and hold a much better position than Georgians in the Gali region in Abkhazia, for example. Nevertheless, the lack of professional prospects and their fixation on a guest status within Abkhazian society are leading to increased immigration to Russia, where existing Armenian and Hamshen solidarities are to be found, and where horizons seem more interesting. At the time of the research fieldwork in 2020, the Armenian community of Abkhazia was trying to counter this phenomenon by focusing on Armenian schools, Armenian festivities and celebrations, and by fighting against discrimination against Armenians in Abkhazia, which is unfortunately still present. The aim for these identity entrepreneurs, as the theorians call them, is to strengthen the roots of Armenians in Abkhazia by recalling their past as brothers in arms and companions on the road to independence, and to create a real place for the community as Armenians, especially in Abkhazian politics. Galus Trabizonian, who himself lost leg in the war of Abkhazia, puts it this way, quote, "We took part in the war, we lost people, and in this way we can say that Abkhazia is our homeland."
So I come to the conclusion. As we have argued, Hamshens and Artsakhtsis relate to Armenia as their second homeland. For both communities, their relation to the Republic of Armenia, which they choose as their point of reference and sort of romantic homeland, was difficult. They both felt a growing distance between them and the Republic of Armenia since the end of the Soviet Union. Apart from this, the two communities entertain close and manifold relations to their diaspora communities in the Russian Federation, which is vital for their possibility to perpetuate their different identities. In the case of Artsakh, the Western Armenian diaspora has more interest and leverage in advocating for a return and the rights of Artsakh people in their former territories, as the refugees themselves could possibly have in their current situation of economic insecurity and dispersal, not only across Armenia but also beyond. The Artsakh government in exile continues to claim rights and the prospect of return to Artsakh, and due to the financial support to their structures withdrawn by the Armenian government, they will only be able to do so if they receive support from the Western diaspora. The realization of the extent of loss and the meaning of this particular experience that makes them differ from Armenians in Armenia is already reflected in Artsakhtsis' current self-identifications and will become gradually more evident. In Abkhazia, Armenian identity entrepreneurs are trying to counter the phenomenon of emigration to Russia and acculturation, since the closure of Armenian national schools has tended to reduce the use of Eastern Armenian in favor of Russian. Their aim is to give the Armenian community in Abkhazia a voice, particularly in politics, so that their desire to finally be on an equal footing with the titular nationality of Abkhazia is realized, while remaining an Armenian community in language and culture. Although programs such as Aritun, in collaboration with the High Commission for the Diaspora in Armenia, have been organized, Armenia is still uncomfortable with this Abkhazian diaspora located on territory claimed by its important and strategic neighbor, Georgia. We have shown that the ongoing diasporization is shaped by growing isolation, detachment, and abandonment through the reduced or obstructed relation to the imagined homelands in Armenia and Karabakh, while relations to other post-Soviet diaspora communities in the Russian Federation are strengthened. In the post-Cold War context of unfreezing conflict at the margins of the former Soviet Union and the ongoing shifts in global order, Hamshens in Abkhazia and Artsakhtsis proved to be rather brothers in spirit than brothers in arms. Thank you very much.
Donc, si je comprends bien, c'est moi qui continue ou qui termine. So I can say that I was very sensible and I could say astonished and honored when the organization Anush Der Sarkisian, Boris Ajemian, Alain Navarra de Borja Navarsatian invited me to participate to this colloquium. As a member of a Turkish Studies Institute in Strasbourg, I have all the time the story of Abkhaz, but Muslim Abkhaz, Chechen, Cherkess, and so on, and Azerbaijanis or Turkish people. So what could be here the common points between the four communication of our speakers? It's not very easy. Gohar Iskanderyan, Arman Khachatryan, Carlos Antaramian, Annika Törne, and Zadik Tisserand spoke about quite different case of diaspora segments or section. Some of these are very old historically. For instance, Iran and Israel, due to 2,000 historical era. It's very, very long. And this very comparative to the Israel and Armenian diaspora in this time, with the Iran, Armenian, and so on. One is formerly much more recent and modern. This is the case of Mexico. And we have another problem for comparative case of diasporization in the basis of very old segment, but new facts about Abkhazia and Hemshin. And the dramatically recent case of Karabakh or Artsakh in Armenian. This is very interesting to compare these quite different segments of diaspora. Is a relatively vicinity. For instance, Israel, Caucasus, Iran, and the very strange segment is of Mexico. I said that Mexico is not so strange if we remind that in Latin America we have the terminology of Los Turcos. And Los Turcos, from Mexico in the north until Chile and Argentina in the south, are defined as Turkish, but they are not Turkish. They are Palestinian, they are Lebanese, they are Syrian and former Christians. One of them could be Muslim, but the great majority are Christian. And they said Turcos, they came from Ottoman Empire. A remark here, this diaspora continues, the diaspora, Armenian diaspora continues since 2,000 years. It's very, very long. It with renewed flows. The first one in the Iran Empire and the old empire, 2,000 years. But the case of Karabakh shows that of Abkhazia shows that they're very, very these days. So, Gohar, Mrs. Gohar Iskanderyan spoke about the case of one of the oldest parts of the Armenian diaspora to Iranian Empire, and it's very interesting to see that this very, very old diaspora section, very various, they're very different. There is some people who came from the genocide, but the others are merchants in Venezia, in Italy. The others are soldiers in the Armenian Empire, and so on. And this was part of dissemination in Western and Central Asia to Turkestan, beginning in the south, in the 6th centuries before DC. Here, Iran, we can show that others are diasporized, but the important fact is the reduction, is not the return, but the flow of Iranian diaspora, of Armenian Iranian diaspora, to America, to Europe, not so to Armenia, but in all the segment of diaspora, historical diaspora, and so there is a lot of reasons to quit Iran. Another field is certainly the crystallization, all this case, of the nation-state building, with particularities. It's not obvious to compare Turkey, Iran, or Russia, of Arabic lands, or Israel, for instance. But we saw, in the case of Iran, we assist to a massive flow of immigration. in this Armenian population of Iran, there were some rights, historical rights in the Safavid or Qajar or Pahlavi Empire of the first time of Islamic Republic, but all this is now disappeared. With the case of Arman Khachatryan, we have a case of Israel who can be quite similar to Iran, with a very, very old diaspora, with the Patriarchate of Jerusalem, and the people who came from a lot of reasons, very different reasons, but the most important in these days is the reason due to the genocide in Turkey, Ottoman Empire. The interesting point is maybe the succession of historical wives of migrants, so in Iran, of Israel, in a very, very, very long history. In the case of Mexico, Michoacan, the history here is totally different. This is due to migration of population post-genocide, and maybe similar to this of Turcos, the South America, different from the case of Iran, Israel, and the Caucasus, due to part of this post-genocide migration. With Annika Törne and Zadig Tisserand, this is another another world, I can see. Another world because the comparative cases of Hemshin and Artsakhi or Karabartsi people solve some historical events separated by more than in period of 100 years can write or rewrite a very close effect about psychology of the persons and the collective people, or the people. The Hemshin escaped from the territories. I was sometimes in Trabzon on Artvin, and I meet Hemshin, or I meet Hemshin in Poitiers, for instance. The Hemshin of France or the Hemshin in Turkey are not Armenian. They are Hemshinli. They speak Hemshinje, and they are very, very prudent. Okay, but not Armenian. But I was with a friend in Trabzon and Giresun also, and I went to Zilkalesi. The people, the police came. What? You are French? Why do you go to say Hemshin? We don't know what is Hemshin, but we took it. This is dangerous to go to Hemshin. The Hemshin occupied the territories East Anatolians, Karadenis, East Mer Noire, Black Sea, and they are mixed with the Laz, who are very, very interesting people. The Laz are Muslims, but the Laz are new Muslims, as the Cherkess and Chechen. They are converted in some ago. But I'm saying that this fought Armenian massacre about the Hemshin and the year of genocide. The Karabakh case is very, very different. Because Karabakh is a part of historical Armenia. It's one of the bases of Armenian civilization, with all the Khachkar, the churches and monastery, and it's a form of historical fortress until this day. So events and periods are very, very different in all the cases, but the individual and collection effects, for instance, in Israel, with the very interesting cases of Armenian Jews. We have in Tel Aviv Kurdish Jews. So are they Kurdish, are they Armenian, or are they Jews? That's very interesting. But the coded effects, I can say, are quite similar. So it was not easy to resume and to make a point of view about this for communication. But I think the major point is the long-term history. As Fernand Braudel says, l'histoire de long terme, with 2,000 years of massacre, of genocide, of migration, of exiles. And this is the main similar point with, between Israel and Jews diaspora and Armenian diaspora. But I was in some colloquium. I remain with, we work with Khachatryan in Toulouse. It's maybe difficult to speak between Israeli and Armenian researchers. As the Israeli one said, no, Armenia, this is not a genocide. We have genocide. This genocide is the genocide of Jews. Armenia is different. I don't see all the difference. This is a long history, and two little state. And I have a question about the possibility with the human beings about the negationism. Negation is the negation of the humanity of some groups. They have no chance. Armenia is very little state now. Israel is very little state now. But this long history is totally denied, for instance, by the Turkish state. Say in history, we don't find Armenian state. We don't find Kurdish state. We don't fight Israel. I say for the Palestinian, for the Jews. And this is for me the very important things to say, that some people have no chance. Israel or Jews or Armenians, they have a place in the world with very strategic, but blocked instead of great masses of population, Turkish, Iranian, Arabic or Slavic Russian. And I was very interesting, but about the Hemshin from Abkhazia. I said that the Russian side is not the friend of the Armenian people, said Putin and Nikol Pashinyan, for instance. As the intervention of Azerbaijani army in Karabakh, we saw that the Russian troops don't do anything to protect the Armenian people of Karabakh. And so we know the truth. Thank you. Now, I think that we have some minutes to remark, to questions.
First of all, thank you very much for the lecture from this morning and this afternoon. All the topics are really very interesting. More? Yeah. This is a good point, because my question is actually to you, Armel Khachatryan. I was wondering, in the world, there are 350,000 Messianic Jews. We never hear them regarding the Govye Bardes question. Okay, they're not very numerous, but nevertheless, there are 20,000, up to 20,000 within Israel. So I was wondering if you have any feedback from them, and what's their position? Are they more siding with the Jewish side or the Christian side?
Thank you for the question. Actually, I didn't study the Govye Bardes issue because it's not my focus. I just studied Armenian involvement around this Govye Bardes. I mean, not the issue itself, but the behavior of the old and new community towards this Govye Bardes. And also because I have done my PhD at the Ben Gurion University, and my doctorate was Armenian Jerusalem community in the Patriarchate. I know I have insider information what's going on around these Govye Bardes, but at this point I will keep it behind, because there is something very hard to discuss and to say where is the true and where is the real issue. But I can say that the Armenian living in Armenian quarter, they say that this also because of the Messianic Jewish community of Jerusalem, because of the settlers. And we can see that a couple of months ago, the settlers come to the Armenian quarter with weapons, with dogs, and they attacked the Armenian community. And at that time, the patriarch go and met with these people, and they were very crazy. And all Armenians living in Israel, all the new communities, it doesn't matter. They say that behind of this deal, standing these settlers and the Israeli government, let's say, or Jerusalem mayor, yeah, including Messianic, of course, because the Messianic ideology is that everything in Jerusalem should belong to Jews. And also the Zion. Don't forget that these Koverun parties occupied the top of the mountain of Zion. And this is the main ideology of these Messianic Jews.
Yeah, but at the same time they recognize Jesus as their savior. So I was wondering if that Christian influence could also push them to support the Armenians who are there for generations.
Yeah, I can't say because I didn't go inside of these kind of things, but I know that the Armenian community in Jerusalem, they blame the Israeli government, saying that, and also the settlers, that they are behind of this deal, which is a very controversial deal, as I said. Thank you.
I was intrigued by Zadig Tisserand and Annika Ton's talk, and I wanted to kind of make comments to questions related to each other. You can kind of choose and pick which one you want to address. So my first reaction was more about what the Soviet period was like for the Abkhazians, in particular for the Armenians in Abkhazia. And the question was to what extent the Soviet Armenian government during the Soviet period built or did not build relations with Armenians in Abkhazia during the Soviet period. The second question was that it seems that the Armenian government is quite uncomfortable or doesn't quite know what to do with these Armenian Abkhazians now, given their the Georgia strategic, if not existential, kind of importance for Armenia. I wonder what is the Armenian government's kind of discourse nowadays of the discourse of not being able to deal with these Armenians of Abkhazia, apparently. But so these two questions, sort of like the Armenians, from Armenians' governmental perspective, are curious to me during the Soviet period and then the post-Soviet period. Thank you for your work and for everyone also for the presentation.
Before answering, we will have a set of questions in order to save time.
Thank you very much for most interesting presentations. And I have actually two questions, one for Arman and next for Annik. Arman, my question is, many Jews or rather Armenians who present themselves as Jews emigrated from Armenia to Israel just because they wanted to emigrate, and sometimes they even were in search of their Jewish roots deep into the family. And when they get Israel, they continue to consider themselves mostly Armenians, not Jews, because being a Jew was kind of a pretext for them to get out of Armenia. And my question is how this double identity influenced their everyday life. Are they really involved in the Armenian diasporic structures, or maybe they are slowly changing their identity and become real Jews? How this process is, and the second question is rather terminological one to Annik. When you say diasporization of Artsakhtsi, what do you mean, in fact? Because what do you mean saying by diasporization? Does it mean being involved into a particular structure, or I don't know, being a very different group which is trying to remain isolated, or what? I didn't understand, unfortunately. Thank you.
There is a question here. Susi.
Thank you Thank you to all the panelists for these really exciting papers. I'm going to limit my question to Professor Antaramian. I'm really curious to know a little bit more context about this statue of Aliyev in Mexico and, how it came about. Is there a substantial Azerbaijani diaspora community in Mexico? Is this lobbying efforts, or are they mostly business and investment relationships between the two states? Thank you.
Thank you. For the time being, I think we can start answering.
Okay. First of all, thank you for a question. Tikina Antonian. She was my professor, and I'm so... it's honor for me to receive some question from you. First of all, I would like to say that there is we need to make differentiation between Jewish identity and Israeli identity. Coming to the question, I have to say that Armenians coming from Armenia to Israel, they took this, they are taking this Israeli identity. What means they are going to study in Israeli universities, they are serving in our Israeli army, they are very proud for that, but not Jewish identity, because Jewish identity means to practice as a Jew. To practice as a Jew, it means that you need to practice religion, to be very... sometimes there are some branches that you need to be radical about some issues. But I can say that Armenians living in Israel, coming from Armenia, especially from the collapse of the Soviet Union, mainly they adapted this Israeli identity. And sometimes, for example, when I interview a wonderful actor, she was serial actor, yeah, she's... She said me, I asked her, so could you define me your identity? Because she was born in Israel, but part of her life she used to live in Armenia. She said me, oh, it's so difficult. I can't define my identity. Sometimes it's a Jewish, Israeli, and sometimes it's Armenian. I say, don't worry, there's some word for that. It's a dual identity. Yes, I have dual identity. I'm Israeli when I'm living in Israel, but also I'm Armenian. That's the answer of your question. Thank you.
Thank you. Please try to make your answers short so that we don't lose time. Thank you.
So thank you a lot for your question, sir. During the Soviet period, actually, I would say that the main links between the Abkhazian Armenians and the Republic of Armenia were through education and through these very Armenian schools, Armenian national schools. In fact, the Armenians, Abkhazian Armenians, it was kind of a cycle for them to go study in Armenia in the Abovian Pedagogical Institute or in the Agronomy Institute, from where they could go back to Abkhazia in order to work there, and it was very usual, and it has never been a question for the Abkhazian Armenians to immigrate at the time to Armenia, since in the essence of the Abkhazian Socialist SSR, they were the multinationality. There were Estonians, Greeks, Russians, Armenians, Cherkess, and many other nationalities considered so. With Armenian schools, national schools, and in the case of Armenians, national schools where they could maintain their identity. So for them, it has never been a question, and the political ties between Abkhazian Republic and Armenian Republic did not exist very much. While the war in '92 created a real problem for the Armenian government post-independence, especially since the participation of part of Abkhazian Armenians in the war alongside Abkhazians. And actually, this Bagramian battalion was part of the Georgian propaganda at some point to say they are Armenian traitors, see what they will do in Javark tomorrow. And this also did not play in favor of the ties between the Armenian Republic and the Abkhazian Armenians. And it's still, a malaise. Yes, exactly. And at the point that, so you have this program Aritun that worked during some years between the Diaspora High Commission for Diaspora in Armenia. But the leaders of the Armenian community in Abkhazia had to get, for example, the textbooks for Armenian schools in Sochi to take them to Abkhazia. They could not take them through, for example, Georgia. And I mean, as an illustration of the situation. And this is not changing currently.
Thank you for this short answer. So,
well, thank you for your question.
It's very short.
Okay,
Okay, very short.
No, I mean, you can speak, of course. No, you can.
Well, about the statue of Aliyev, there is no Azerbaijani community in Mexico, but there is an embassy with lots of money. So they put statues all over the world. There are statues in Bucharest of Aliyev, several in Turkey. They tried to put one in Canada that was stopped, and this one was probably the most famous as we stopped it. But also they were working in the points of agreements since 2011, recognizing the Khojaly genocide as genocide. And they used the same strategy not only in Mexico, but in Colombia, in Honduras. And as I check all the points of agreements, and you could see the same orthographical mistakes in all over Latin America. So it means that it was the Azerbaijani embassy who was trying to pass these resolutions. In the case of the statue of Aliyev, according to Mukhtarov, the ambassador, they spent $10 million. That was the biggest investing in Mexico City by a foreign government. Of course, the Mexico government said that it was only $6 million. I'm still trying to see what happened with those $4 million. Well, thank you.
$4 million.
I have myself a question, perhaps, for Gohar Iskanderyan. It's double. Sorry.
Ça va? Okay. I will keep it very short since I see that you're getting tired. Just for the question regarding the question, as I understand you, it's about the question if Karabakhzis actually could become a sort of a diaspora even in Armenia, right? So diasporization here is understood as a process. Is among people with whom I spoke, there were many who told me it's not the first time that they have been displaced, but it's the first time they feel that they definitely lost their home. And one of the basic ideas about diaspora communities is this experience of essential loss and displacement without the possibility of return for most of them. This is why, I mean, it's not, I don't put this in stone. It's an ongoing situation. But I think it is worth asking this question. And I remember that a few years back there was on the website of the High Commission of the Diaspora in Armenia, there was this saying about Artsakh or Nagorno-Karabakh that that it always belonged and it will always belong to Armenia. This is of course taken off the website now, as also there is no mentioning of Hamshen in Abkhazia, for example, and all these observations brought me to the idea that this could be an interesting point to look at. So this is certainly not as easy as it seems for Artsakhtsis to get integrated into Armenia.
Thank you. If I can add a question to Gohar, do the Armenian people in Iran consider themselves as a diaspora, as diaspora people? I was not sure, but what you think, because for instance, the Armenian people in Turkey, in Istanbul, it's a sensitive question. They are reluctant to consider themselves as diaspora people. And also, since this morning we talked about the thanatology discourse about diaspora, and you were talking about the perspectives of repatriation between quotation marks to Armenia. I was wondering if there are any concern in this community about the fact that the community itself has to be maintained, has to last. So instead of repatriating to Armenia.
Thank you for question. It is a very long answer, but I would like to tell short, and during the coffee break I will answer you. Yes, because we are so tired, all of us. But I would like to say that Iranian Armenians not feel them as a diaspora, because they live there 1,000 years, and they think, especially at the area of Atrapatakan, they feel that it is their homeland. And but if they have a chance, they with a great pleasure comes to Armenia and live in Armenia. But after 2020, we saw that situation is changed, and they look Europe or the United States, unfortunately. And I hope that all of us will come back to home, to Armenia. Thank you.